Welcome back to the Trusted Visions Weekly Podcast. I do apologize that we weren't on schedule this week with all the weather and loss of power and water here in Texas. It was a little difficult for us to do a podcast. Just so you know, we are all well. Still don't have running water, but we're getting there. I'm not accustomed to this type of weather. I know Deb and David are, but here in Texas, when it gets to 20 degrees, 12 degrees, we're not used to that stuff. So I apologize for the beard. We have no running water. And I had to put on a long sleeve shirt underneath it. David's probably going to call me a wimp because you were what, negative 20?
We were negative 24 there for a while, right around the 20s. I think we were the longest stretch of like 14 days of being either a negative or below freezing.
Yeah, see, and here we've had this for 5 days of no higher than 12 degree temp or no lower than 12 degree temperatures, and I feel like I'm dying. So I don't envy you, David, or you, Deb. I don't know how you guys do it, but Texas is not prepared for this kind of weather. So again, we do apologize for being a couple days late with our weekly scheduled podcast, and we want to continue down the path of being a successful recruiting OSJ or enterprise. And this week's topic it's a topic, in my opinion, that is often overlooked because when you think about being a recruiting OSJ or enterprise and being successful at it, the first things you think is value proposition, payouts, pricing, how do I grow, target audience. And this topic typically slips the mind of many out there of the time and financial commitment you as a recruiting OSJ or enterprise need to be prepared for if you're going to be successful being a recruiting enterprise or OSJ. And so the first part I want to cover is really the financial commitment. And there's a wide variety of different things to consider here. Is many times broker dealers that you're affiliated with will require you as a recruiting enterprise or OSJ to cover half or a portion of the third-party recruiting firm's, placement fee. So you have to be prepared for that and know that that's just part of doing business. But in addition to that, there's times where you're going to come across a prospect that you really, really want, that fits that, as David said last week, fits that mold in the type of advisor you're looking for the long-term growth of your recruiting enterprise or OSJ. And it's by chance the broker dealer may not be able to get financially where that advisor wants to be from a transition package standpoint. And so you have to be prepared to really kick in above and beyond what the broker dealer is going to do to get that ideal advisor. And so with that being said, since we missed you last week, Deb, I'll kick it off to you. Is there any other financial commitments that you can think of that an OSJ or enterprise need to think about when they're going forward with setting up a successful recruiting OSJ or enterprise?
Well, I think the key one is that, as you said, right? So if you are working with a broker dealer and they're using a outside third party recruiting firm, that when you're working truly as a partnership, you should be prepared to, maybe help chip in on the cost for that third party recruiter, right? And kind of everybody have skin in the game sort of a deal. And you've got that. And also from a transition standpoint, you've got the cost of the third party recruiter. You may have to also kick in on the transition piece of it. So as you're negotiating, or the broker dealer is negotiating the transition, right? What it's going to cost to move the book of business and get the advisor over, they may be able to give, and I'm not going to give specifics, X amount of basis points. And it may take an extra 5 basis points to be competitive in that deal and to be able to get that advisor to move. And you should be prepared to help pitch in as well on that transition cost. I mean, I guess as I think through that, those are probably, the top two costs. David can probably add something to that, but to me, those are the two big ones that you should be prepared to pitch in and help in getting that person over. Again, and I'll just go back to that saying, it's everyone has skin in the game. You want to make it a win-win situation. It's a partnership between you and the broker dealer, in my mind, to really have a successful recruiting OSJ branch.
And David, I know you love when I do this, and we just talked about it a few minutes before this, but it just came to mind. And last month we talked about exploring your broker dealer options and things to think about and how to negotiate your transition package. Throughout our careers, there's been many times where a OSJ or enterprise will negotiate with the broker dealer when they're joining of, hey, going forward for the next 12, 18, 24 months, you as the broker dealer will assure me that any advisor I bring over, they'll get 20 or 30% going forward for that 12, 18, 24 months. How important is that to think about long-term when they are exploring the broker dealer options, if you want to be a successful recruiting OSJ or enterprise, to make that part of your negotiations?
Huge. But when you're looking at, if you've got somebody that you're recruiting over that's already been pretty successful in the recruiting side of it and is building their OSJ, that it's just part of their plan. It's part of every single piece of their package that they're putting together when it comes to that transition side of it. But it's something you've got to think about. And that's why it's very important to make sure you have the right broker dealer partner that's going to support you, not only from the promises that they give you up front, but what they're going to deliver for the next 12 to 18 months, the next 2 to 3 years, of getting that in writing and getting that as part of your package of negotiating not only the support that they're going to be able to help you not only recruit to your branch, and as both you and Deb stated, it comes down to both having skin in the game. How do you work with third-party recruiters? How do you work with the internal recruiters that the broker dealer has? And understanding that process and that partnership, because that's key. And then absolutely, when you're looking at the financials of it and you really want to build a recruiting OSJ and you've got a really good branch and you've got a successful branch that you want to grow into, if you haven't had that support with your current broker dealer, it's going to be a big piece of the puzzle when you're looking at a new broker dealer making a change. And getting that in writing, we've negotiated a number of deals with larger OSJ branches where we give them a guarantee no matter what. If this is what their GDC is, this is what we're going to give you as far as a transition package that goes along with it. So it gives not only the recruiting OSJ less back and forth between the broker dealer, they've kind of got carte blanche on what they're going to give them as far as a package. This is what we're looking at. We kind of come up with a deal so they know in the next 12 months, this is what they're going to have. And then you can also extend that out. It's like, okay, after that 12 months, maybe it gets a little bit less rich and they put a few more guidelines in it, but build that in for year 2, year 3. Because when you're transitioning it over, you've got 3 to 6 months to get the transition. Now you've only got 6 months to deal with that first 12-month contract you put in place. So look at it long-term. It's the first 12 months, but it's also that second and third year that's going to be just as important as the first.
Agreed. And one thing I would add to this, again, just comes top of mind as you guys are talking, because you guys are great at this, is, Deb has said many times throughout these podcasts, the devil's in the details. And one thing as a recruiting OSJ or enterprise you really got to look out for is, should that advisor that you're trying to recruit receive transition money, should he or she ever leave the broker dealer or default on that transition loan, who's responsible? Because some broker dealers say, hey, if all the money goes to that advisor, then only that advisor is responsible. Some broker dealers say, if all the money goes to the advisor, but the advisor defaults on it, we'll try and go after them. But if we're not successful, you as the OSJ are on the hook for it. And I can say from experience, when they say they're going to try and go after that advisor for the money, it's typically sending a letter or two. It's not aggressively going after them. So to your point, Deb, the devil's in the details as it pertains to making sure you understand, and that's the importance of working with a firm like Trusted Visions, is that's something you may not think of until it's too late. And so relying on the expertise of a firm like Trusted Visions is vital in setting you up for long-term success. And so now I'm going to pivot a little bit as it pertains to cost and the financial commitment when it comes to marketing dollar spends and building relationships with third-party recruiting firms, because I do believe it's vital for recruiting OSJs or enterprises to be able to build relationships with third-party recruiting firms to increase lead flow. But also, similar to what we do, we spend a tremendous amount marketing dollar-wise. Deb, can you speak a little bit about what an OSJ or enterprise can expect, not necessarily a dollar amount, but what they should be looking at from a marketing perspective of, should they be doing email blasts, cold calling campaigns, drip mail campaigns? What would you suggest from your experience that be?
Well, all of the above, right? It's that three-legged stool that anybody in sales, knows, unless maybe you have a four-legged stool. That's kind of was a joke. I must be too cold. Anyway, so it's everything, right? It's kind of the three-legged thing where you're doing direct mail. Um, you might be cold calling, email marketing. You really have to be doing multiple things at one time to get your name out. From a cost perspective, it's hard to say, because you can talk to somebody in Kansas and their marketing and firms that they use is going to cost differently, or direct mail piece, than somebody in New York, let's say. I mean, now that's a little bit extreme, but it's always hard to really, reps always want to pin you down on the cost, and it's kind of difficult because everything's going to vary depending upon who you go to. And fortunately, with so much increased competitiveness, if you will, on direct mail companies, cold calling firms, email services, it really has become a lot less expensive, but it still is an expense, right? And so you've got to be prepared to be doing those types of things. And that again is something that potentially, to what David was talking about, and also you, Jeremy, something devil's in the details is about, when you're joining a firm, maybe get something in writing from the broker dealer that says, we will help support you, right, in this manner in your marketing efforts as well. Maybe it's not paying for all of it, but maybe they say, hey, we'll have our recruiters commit X amount of time a month to you to make calls on your behalf, or we'll do a mailer a month on your behalf, right? For a direct mail campaign, something in writing that says, here's specifically what we're going to do to help in your recruiting efforts that will help in that cost as well. And I'm going to kind of jump back because when you were talking about making sure everything was in writing, and when you're working on the transition deal, I do think that's something that advisors need to be really aware of and get in writing, right? I had boss used to say, get everything in writing, because unfortunately, if you don't have things clearly spelled out, then at some point that could come back to bite you, right? So most firms in their practice management piece, and they're talking with advisors, oh yeah, we can help you recruit, we can do this for you, we can do that for you. And then too many times, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, that firm really is not doing much for them, right? And so the bigger organization that truly wants to grow needs to have those things specifically written down. And again, from the marketing side of it, I would suggest to advisors to make the firm put down, we will specifically do this. We'll specifically spend this much time. And then how much cost, time and money it's going to cost you for the remainder of that. But definitely it's going to be doing multiple things at the same time.
Perfect. And I love that. I didn't even think about that. But as we talked about putting into writing or negotiating as part of your transition package, long term, hey, this is what we'll offer future advisors. Similar to that, Deb, as you mentioned, negotiating that as part of your transition packages, we'll spend X dollars over a period of time to help you recruit. Yeah. So David, this is a topic, and I'm starting to feel like every week there's at least one thing that it just really drives me crazy, and I have sometimes a differing opinion. So I'm going to start with you on this as it pertains to the financial commitment. What are your thoughts, and what advice could you give to recruiting OSJs and enterprises? We know that there's a lot of firms, and it's not meant as an insult to these firms by any means, that say, hey, David, as you the recruiting OSJ or enterprise, if you give me, let's just call it a $5,000 a month retainer and agree to give me that $5,000 a month for 6 months, I'll send you 5, 10, 15 leads a month that are qualified. What are your thoughts on a retainer-based type of arrangement versus a results-based type of arrangement? And what advice or feedback would you give to recruiting OSJs or enterprises?
Well, my personal opinion, I don't like it. I think in a lot of cases, you're not getting the value that's there. You're getting sold a bill of goods. And it really comes down to you want the results. It's like being able to put themselves on the hook to pay their expenses to help you to recruit to your branch. Uh, it's not what we do in our business. It's results driven. If we're going to be a true partner and working with you, we got to have results. And that's how the compensation works, not only in our world, but that's how compensation works with recruiters at broker dealers and so on and so forth. Uh, Broker dealers don't make any money or additional money if they don't start recruiting good advisors to their firm. It's the same thing for advisors getting clients. It's the same thing for branches recruiting good advisors to their firm. And what it comes down to is I just don't believe in it. You're paying, you got an overhead cost that goes along with it. And from what Deb mentioned a little bit earlier, I think the money spent better elsewhere. If you want to spend money on marketing, spend money on actually bringing people in the door, spending money on transition costs, because that's actual money that goes to the bottom line of making results for growing your branch. And putting in a retainer for somebody to give you services, it's just too difficult in our industry to get the value, because sometimes it's feast or famine. And what it comes down to is you just want to be able to find good people to work with, not just a bunch of names on a list that may be interested in working with you, but really don't fit the mold that goes along with your branch or even your broker dealer.
Mhm.
Agreed. See, David, that's why I love you, because I would have never thought we would have agreed on that, but that's just an area that's always driven me crazy. So thank you for backing me up on that one. So as we pivot here, let's talk about the time commitment, and I want to be respectful of time. Speaking of time, want to be respectful of the time that we can cover this is, I've always said as a recruiting OSJ or an enterprise, if you're going to be successful, you have to be involved in the process. And when I say in the process, from the introductory point into the introducing to the broker dealer, throughout the process of the home office visit, many successful recruiting OSJs or enterprises have their own, like come to our office and have a home office visit in addition to that. Deb, what is your opinion of how involved should that recruiting OSJ or enterprise be in the process? Because these advisors are obviously going through the process of the broker dealer, but how involved should they be in the process in addition to what they're doing with the broker dealer?
Well, I think they have to be highly involved, right? I mean, at the end of the day, this person is going to join them. And so they need to always, from the beginning, be working on the relationship with that prospective advisor that's going to be joining them. Now, granted, I say that on one hand, and on the other hand, I'm going to go to, but there's also a fine line, right? Because the advisor needs to be doing their job and needs to be working, needs to be bringing in more, taking care of their clients and bringing in more revenue. So they have to be able to balance out how much time do they actually spend on that process and energy versus also their own job. And there's a couple of things that you could do that. They can be involved in making the introduction and be on some calls, whether or not they want to attend a home office visit with them. A lot of times the OSJs will, right? We all know we've worked with them, and especially the very successful ones will make the time to go to the home office as well and be part of that process. But you could also have somebody, we were talking about cost and you're talking about working and sharing in a third party recruiter cost for them. There's also having someone in office. We may or may not agree on this, but whether you want to call them a transition support person, an assistant branch manager, there's a bunch of different names that you could call them, but having somebody, especially again, if you are growing and the larger you get, having somebody in the office that is specifically working with you and with those prospective advisors as they're coming on board through the transition, and all of that also can be very, very helpful. And that's going to be a cost, right? Depending upon what level a person you get and the level of support that they're giving. But there could be a lot of things that they're walking through and taking care of as well that you're not doing. You can do the high level stuff with them, but all of a sudden you've got somebody else internally that is taking care of making sure the advisor profile is completed or whatever you want to call it, right? And making sure the background, if there's additional information needed, and maybe working with the home office transition on the plan and all those details, so that you're not actually getting into the weeds that much.
Yep.
But your office and your firm is still part of that process.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I mean, I think, to your point of having someone in-house that can help with that stuff, and my suggestion would always be start small, because if we just do quick math, you got to figure out what are you going to be recruiting on an annual basis? Because if you're going to be recruiting, let's call it 2 million of new GDC on an annual basis, let's just say on average, which I think is a little bit high, you're going to get a 10% override on that. That's $200,000 in revenue. Well, how much are you going to have to pay for that individual? And so that's what it really comes down to, is maybe you start with a transition person, more of an administrative person that's very methodical and detail oriented, and then you can escalate up as you continue to have growth. So David, anything you want to add before we wrap this week's podcast up?
No, just to add to that, I think it's one of those adage, work smarter, not harder. And it's really finding your partnerships. If you're working with a good third-party recruiting firm that's going to help you with the transition side of it, they can take a lot of work off your plate to get that advisor onboarded and get that taken care of. And it also comes down to the broker dealer you're working with. Sometimes you have a regional director or your recruiting staff that there's some that do an incredible job, that are very detail oriented, but aren't very, people oriented to help people kind of through the emotional side of the transition. It's just kind of evaluating your partners, seeing how it fits, and then utilize the strengths that you've got with not if you're working with a third-party recruiting company or you're working with your broker dealer. Find out what their strengths are, then you'll know where the weaknesses are. Then you'll find out, okay, do I need somebody that really needs to be, the technical savvy person that's going to help partner with myself, the third-party recruiting firm, and my broker dealer to make the onboarding process simple, smooth, and as painful as it can, less painful, because they're always painful, but hopefully less painful throughout the process on that side of it. So it's just like anything else. Evaluate your strengths, your weaknesses, and do the same thing with a third-party recruiting firm if you're working with them, and or your broker dealer. Everybody knows what their strengths and weaknesses are. They don't want to talk about it, but it'll make your life a little bit easier if you acknowledge what those are.
Perfect. Well, everybody, I thank you for your time this week. Again, I apologize for, being a couple of days late with this podcast. We will wrap up this series for this month next week. We look forward to hearing from everybody about your thoughts. And David, Deb, try and stay warm. We're going to try and get water back to the house, but have a great weekend and stay safe.
You too.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.